to Game On Meet Sweden, Game On Talks in connection with NTI Gymnasium. And I'm very bad in Swedish, so you will forgive me that I will say everything wrong, but it's so we're gonna soon start with our first talk of this week with Sophia Drake talking about the history of video games. But before we start that, I wanted to quickly say a thank you for my colleagues at Brum, especially for Riesa, who is being so kind in being our technical guy and giving me a hand. Like, I have zero talent for that, and without him that wouldn't look this good. And also for Jung and NTI Gymnasiet and all the students for making this event and bringing us together. It's very exciting to be here. If you guys don't know what Game On is, this is the brand new project in the region of Västernorrland, where we are developing the game development hub. And the idea is to bring all the companies, all the students, everybody interested in game development together. And these talks are, I think, a great way to actually kickstart this and get people talking and discussing about why video games, why is it important for the region, and what we're trying to build. And now that the thank yous are out of it, I would like to introduce my dearest friend, Sophia, who works with me at Still Media in the PGC, Pocket Gamer Connects events, but also works in the Coral's worldwide publisher in Japan, and has been working in game business for, let's not say how long, right? So like, we don't want to give our age away. Like, we're just 20, almost no experience. Yeah. Welcome. And Sophia has been working with games and indie game developers for a very long time, has a very warm relationship with indies. Like, indie developers are your thing, right? So
yes, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I've worked with indie developers for a long time now, and helping to sort of, well, a range of different things, helping to, you know, connect indie developers with publishers and investors and journalists, helping to talk about video games through and indie games through journalism, and obviously my main thing, running the Big Indie Picture competition to help promote and showcase all of their work. So yeah, lots of stuff with indie developers, really.
Yeah, we have a horrible job in being around these creative, amazing people doing the best games ever. It's like, indies are the best. Like, a lot of people think that the bigger game companies are the best. No, the indies are the best.
Yeah,
that's where everything starts.
Yeah, there's you know, and as I'll talk about in a bit, it's like right now and the sort of last 10 years or so, we've really been able to see indie development flourish, and it's really good because it shows all the amazing creative ideas that are coming out of the scene. And yeah, for me, it's just kind of like an honor to be able to help promote indie developers and all the work that they do. So yeah, I think it's really good, and it helps bring a lot of diversity to the industry.
And you guys are going to see a lot of Sophia here in the project, because I'm always engaging her to do stuff with us and to help the companies in pitching and showing their games to the world. So you're going to see her a lot. But without further ado, I will let you talk about the history of video games. For you guys to know, Sophia has been researching that like since forever, has a book published about it. So I leave you in the best hands possible. So please go ahead, and I come back in the end to help with questions. Guys, if you want to ask Sophia a question, I ask you to write in the chat. And in the end of the presentation, I'm going to come in, I'm going to read the questions to Sophia, and we can have a discussion together, and it's going to be great. Okay, so I leave you to the presentation. I will mute myself and walk this way.
Thanks. Yeah, so before I share my screen quickly, like I say, I'll just reiterate what Patty says. If you've got any questions for me or anything like that, throw them into the chat. Because I'll be on full screen, I might not be able to see them, but don't worry, we'll come back to them and go through them. So I'm going to just quickly share my screen. For a moment, you'll see behind the curtain, so to speak. But let me go back to that. Let me roll that there. Hopefully you guys can all see me now and you can see the presentation. Yeah, I've called this a brief history of video games. Obviously, it's a massive topic for me to cover. And my aims really for this presentation are to go through the beats of where we started to where we are now, some of the key creators, some of the key games, key events, and obviously the consoles and platforms. I might tell you a lot of stuff that you know, but hopefully I throw in a few things that you didn't know, and hopefully I leave you with some things that you might think, do you know what, I want to play that game now, or I want to go and investigate that area more, or anything like that. And obviously, if you do feel like that at the end and you want me to give you more information, I'll share with you my contact details and everything else like that. Also, quickly before we start, as Patty alluded to, just to sort of explain my knowledge so that it helps validate some of what I'm about to say. Obviously, I've worked in the industry now for a long time and helping support indie developers and working with big and small companies alike. But alongside that, I've also written a master's thesis on Nintendo and Japan's video game industry during my Japanese studies master's. And I've also written for various books. Mainly, I specialize in retro video games of the 8 and 16-bit era, of which I also have my own website covering those sorts of games. And I specialize a lot in Nintendo stuff. So if you hear me talk about Nintendo a fair bit, I do apologize, but I will explain why I believe that to be interesting. But let's start. So yeah, a brief history of video games. I used a picture of Mario because, well, it's Super Mario. But yeah, so we start with the beginnings and what we call the golden era, the golden age. This starts in around the early 1970s, and some of the key platforms you can see here is shock horror. I'm sure it surprises no one. One of the key platforms we see is the arcades. This is where we get the era that, America loves to promote through the, in the early 80s with the arcade culture and the quarters. But it was also a blossoming and booming area in Japan as well, the arcades. And actually, to this day, Japan still has a massive culture of arcade cabinet promotion. In fact, I was only in Japan just before the pandemic and spent an afternoon in Akihabara, the electronics district, at the Sega arcade that is sadly now closed, looking at all the games and playing the games and promoting everything, which was really quite amazing. Of course, we've also got the Atari 2600, which was the key console of the time. Your standard pop the cartridge in the top, play games, and we'll go through some of the key games at the time and kind of what led to the demise of Atari. But Atari at the time was one of America's biggest companies and really boomed this whole era. There was, like I say, we'll go through some of the games, but you can see some of them at the bottom that we're alluding to, like Pac-Man was one of the big ones. It mainly, a lot of the time, took a lot of the arcade greats and put them on the small screen for everyone to enjoy. If you heard a ping there, I do apologize. That was a voicemail coming through. Anyway, modern technology, But let's focus on the classic technology that I do love. We also had I'll come to the Magnavox Odyssey in a minute, but we also had a really booming home computer market that was covered, like the Amiga, the Commodore 64. In the UK, we had things like the Spectrum and the Amstrad, which was Alan Sugar. If anyone's ever watched the UK Apprentice, that was his company. He got into the home computer market. Obviously, these were exactly what they say on the tin, home computers, but they were also built with gaming in mind as well. And there was a lot of key games that came about through those eras, especially in Europe. There was a big home computer market in comparison to the arcade and console markets that were seen in America and Japan. And of course, the Magnavox Odyssey, because the Magnavox Odyssey precedes all of those ones before. So the Magnavox Odyssey is basically the first video game console. And we'll come to Ralph Baer in a minute, who invented it. But essentially, if you imagine a small box, that would be your controller, and it had these twisty dials on the side, and they would move like the Pong elements from side to side. But what you also did that was quite interesting is, because the console couldn't create graphics, people back in those days had screen overlays that you would literally TV that would create an image of a football field or a hockey rink or something like that, and it would create those extra layer of graphics that the machine wouldn't create. But it did also use these like slidey carts as well. So the Magnavox Odyssey is really quite important because it's the genesis of that home console market, something that Atari really capitalized on moving forward. But yeah, as I've been talking about, you can see some of the key events there. We had the rise of the arcades and the culture of you know, the quarters and having your go. And that fundamentally affected the way games were designed, because games were designed to be hard, to be difficult, but also to have that one more go, one more engaging. In many ways, it's a kind of gameplay attitude that the free-to-play model of mobile gaming has sort of rebirthed right now. It shows that actually a lot of ideas that we think are new through monetization and retention mechanics actually have their genesis back in the 70s, because the aim was to keep people playing. You didn't want them to finish the game in one quick go. You wanted them to keep playing, to keep coming back, to keep paying. And that worked. And everyone loved going to the arcades. It became a social experience as well. Obviously, there was Atari. There was an Atari in most homes in America at the time, and there were games galore. Sadly, the games galore bit is one of the problems that Atari faced, and it is something that has come up again in recent years, and I'm going to get to that. But that is ultimately part of what led to the crash of the video game market. Some of the key games we see at the time. Now, you'll see some pictures there. You've got the famous Donkey Kong, which is the first appearance of Super Mario, who at the time was known simply as Jumpman, you know, Miyamoto's creation. Actually, interestingly, that was never the original idea for the game. Nintendo were trying to get into the American arcade market, and they had a range of games called Radar Scope that really failed in America. So they had all these arcade cabinets, and they wanted them reworked. So Shigeru Miyamoto started doing a lot of work on this, and actually wanted to create a game of Popeye, the cartoon, the American cartoon. And so he had the idea was it was Popeye trying to save Olive from, I can't remember the villain. I must apologize. And they actually couldn't get the rights to that. So they reworked this into Donkey Kong and Jumpman. We obviously saw Pac-Man. Pac-Man is, you know, one of the most famous games ever created, and one of the most addictive as well, and really was one of the star attractions of the arcades. Miss Pac-Man's a really interesting one, because Miss Pac-Man was actually an edited game. It was maybe, you know, one of the very first hacks that came about. Fans of the game took it, reworked it, turned it into a female, added a lot of little cute little cutscenes, so to speak, rudimentary cutscenes and stories in between each of the stages. And we had Miss Pac-Man that then later was, you know, relicensed and republished. Obviously, Space Invaders, a key game, and Pong, Donkey Kong, Missile Command. I'm coming back to Oregon Trail, don't worry. And I'm going to skip over a few others and come back. But, you know, what we see with a lot of these is actually quite, in the arcades, there was quite a high amount of technology going on here, and there were quite well-told creations and well-told stories based around the ideas that they were trying to create, which was addictive, fun, social gaming. Now, in terms of those that were on the Atari, these games wanted to take that, but obviously there was no need to play the retention mechanics. So the idea was to keep you there. So, the idea, they didn't need to keep you there. You'd bought the game, so it was for more enjoyment. So there was a lot of more story-based experiences. One of the most famous, which is the second, the picture in the bottom left, which is Pitfall. Pitfall is, you know, essentially, I'm sure a lot of you will know, but it's that Indiana Jones, Uncharted, Tomb Raider style game with loads of, you know, traps and, well, pits to avoid. And, you know, Pitfall is actually one of the key standout games of the Atari console, in my opinion. And yeah, really good. The Oregon Trail, that took some really strong story mechanics, telling about the travelers from America moving across the country with loads of, you know, different things to avoid, like dysentery and, you know, bandits and everything else like that. Yeah, and Dragon's Lair, we all know Dragon's Lair is more, if anything, more like a, you know, clicking the right button at the right time, but it had those really Disney-fied animations. And so, you know, what I'm trying to say is we have like a massive range of experiences here. Some people think that there's only, you know, certain types of arcade experiences, but actually there's a massive range of experiences that show huge amounts of diversity in gameplay. And that all it's layered and layered and layered as we move through the eras. But obviously, when it comes to Atari, and in many ways, this affected the arcade market as well, because as Atari became more and more popular, you know, people at the arcade, there became less and less people at the arcades. And Atari had really boomed. They were doing so well. They had complete control over the market at the time in America. But they ran into a lot of problems that ultimately caused the crash of the market in 1983. Some of these factors include, a loss of publishing control. So they had no real strict controls on who could or couldn't publish games. Anyone who's dealt with Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo, or in the past Sega, or even certain platforms like Epic Games, the Epic Games Store, maybe not so much Steam or Google Play, but even Apple Store, you'll know that a lot of those platforms have a great deal of control as to what they do and don't let on, and they have lots of testing and restrictions. That wasn't the case for Atari. And what happened is, as the gold rush continued, a lot of poor quality games flooded the market due to this loss of publishing. And they also had some key failures of the time, and this is no more epitomized than in E.T. the video game. And now E.T. is that game you can see in the top left. I point that out because you probably wouldn't know it's E.T. unless you knew. It's famously known as one of the worst video games of all time. It's a very interesting story around its development, though. The developer was actually only given a matter of weeks to create the game. He met with Steven Spielberg, who said, "Oh, just make Pac-Man." But it convinced him that, we shouldn't just make a game of Pac-Man, but with E.T. And so instead, he was given a matter of weeks to create this game that was meant to encapsulate everything that the E.T. movie stood for, but, on the Atari 2600's limited platform. It didn't go so well. And in many ways, the developer was blamed for that. But I think in a lot of ways, there's a lot of other features that go into this problem. Atari had promoted this game like no tomorrow because it was an Atari published game. It was highlighting the biggest movie of the time. So they're hoping to capitalize on that. And the point is, it did sell a number of games in its first few days. It stopped selling them after that once people realized just how poor this game is. But that really was the tipping point for Atari and for the golden age, where people started to realize, gosh, there's a lot of rubbish on here. And people were never really, this was before the internet, so people were never really sure whether they were buying something good or not. So just didn't buy a lot of games, and the market slowly started to crash. Famously, it was always a rumor that all the unsold copies of E.T. were buried in the New Mexico desert. A lot of people in America, thought that was just a myth and a funny little story. It was actually true, and it was something that was exposed in Microsoft's Game Over documentary that I think is still on the Xbox platform, but I'm sure you can watch it on loads of other platforms. It was actually true. They did bury a range of these cartridges and boxes for E.T. in the New Mexico desert, which is funny in one sense, but it just shows how maybe they were ahead of themselves, Atari, in what they thought they could sell and how much they thought they could get away with, and it very much crashed. But here's some of the key people of the era. So Ralph Baer is the top right, and Ralph Baer is the creator of the Magnavox Odyssey. So someone to really look into, really interesting character and person who, really pioneered that idea of playing games in your home. Nolan Bushnell, as you can see in the top left, Nolan Bushnell is the head of Atari. He did later sell the company before it crashed, but, he's one of the most influential people in the gaming market who spearheaded its growth. And, Nolan Bushnell is very, very important and is kind of synonymous with Atari and one in the same. Shigeru Miyamoto in the bottom left. I mean, he's going to come up a lot in my talk, and I'm sure he needs no introduction. Creator of the Donkey Kong cabinet for the purposes of the beginnings and the golden age. But we will come back to Shigeru Miyamoto. We've also got Toru Iwatani, who is the creator of Pac-Man. And the two who aren't pictured are Tomohiro Nishikado, who created Space Invaders for Taito. corporation in Japan. And interestingly, Warren Robinette. I add Warren Robinette because it might be a name that a lot of you know, might be a name that some of you don't know. He's a really interesting character. And if anyone's ever watched Ready Player One or read the book, Warren Robinette is actually a huge inspiration for that story and a lot of what it tells, and a lot of what Halliday in the story has done with his Easter egg, because Warren Robinette actually put the first high-profile Easter egg into a video game ever. That video game was Adventure, which is the inspiration in many ways for Ready Player One. It was an adventure game where you went and explored, you found keys, you found puzzles, artifacts, put it all together to find the mystery. But back in the days of the Atari, developers weren't actually credited for their creations. They weren't listed in credits, and it was always the name of the company. It was an Atari game. It was a whatever company game, a Taito game, a Namco game. And this was mainly something that Atari forced, that, everything came under their branding. So developers actually got no recognition. And ultimately, in terms of us talking about history, a lot of them, some people who created some of the most influential games have been lost a little bit and require a lot of digging to find them out. Well, Warren Robinette wasn't satisfied with that and actually hid crediting himself as the developer within Adventure. If you meet certain conditions, find certain secrets, of which that was the point of the game anyway, you will actually come to a room that says designed and created by Warren Robinette, and is in many ways attributed as one of the very first Easter eggs in gaming. So it's just a little interesting fact about Warren Robinette. The other thing I forgot to say about the platforms of the time is that most of these use joysticks. In fact, near enough all of them, apart from the Game & Watch, use the joystick, and we'll come to that in a minute. But yeah, we move forward to the 8-bit era. The 8-bit era is an era epitomized not just by Japan, but by Nintendo. I mean, you can see some of the key platforms. I mean, really, these are the key platforms. There are other platforms, but the word being key. I mean, it's even, I would say in some respects, and I'm a huge Sega fan, but I would say in some respects, it's generous of me to put the Master System in a key platform for the 8-bit era, because this platform is all about the Nintendo Entertainment System and the Famicom. So the Famicom actually came out in Japan at the height of Atari and the golden age of gaming, but obviously it only came out in Japan. I actually have one here from when I used to live in Japan. So this is what the Famicom, it's disappearing, looks like. And it actually was made to look more like a toy. So it has the controllers that detach off the front, and they're actually attached, even though the background takes it away a bit. And there was two of them with the idea of you playing together. The cartridge in there is Super Mario Brothers, the most famous of them all. And the Famicom did great in Japan. It really was successful because, Atari didn't really take off in Japan in the way it did in America, but the Famicom Entertainment System definitely did. Interesting, if anyone wonders what Famicom means, it's Japan loves pushing two words together. You'll see another famous one soon, but Famicom simply means family computer. Famicom, that's literally, so it really was still on that idea of a computer, but it was exclusively to play games. It had the cartridges, it had everything else. And this was really Nintendo not just stepping up, but taking control. Obviously, we get the Game Boy later on, but I first just want to focus on the Famicom, because the Famicom was successful in Japan, but by the time they wanted to take it to America, the market had crashed. Actually, a lot of the games you think about, and you think about their release date, like Super Mario Brothers, Kirby, The Legend of Zelda, these had actually been released earlier in Japan to big success. This was still in the days of years of gaps between games. But when the market crashed, Nintendo saw a gap, and they saw this, frankly, as their chance to take over the market. It's a very famous fact, though, that when they came to sell the Nintendo Entertainment System in America, Minoru Arakawa and Howard Lincoln, who led Nintendo of America at the time, they were sent by President Hiroshi Yamauchi over there. They were famously told by the key stockists, such as Toys R Us, that and there's a quote, it's a famous quote, that it would be easier to sell popsicles in the Arctic than to sell a video game console in America right now. They took that as a challenge, and they managed to convince them to start stocking this, but with necessary changes. I just showed you the Famicom. Sadly, I don't have a Nintendo Entertainment System here with me because it's at my brother's house. But the Nintendo Entertainment System that I'm sure you'll all know is a very different looking designed machine. It has that top loader that, not top loader, it has that open slot with the middle loader. And it was specifically designed to look like a video system, a VHS. And that was so that it looked more like a piece of technology rather than a toy, a games console. It also came with Rob the robot that anyone who's played Smash Brothers will know recently. And Rob connected with one of the games that was on there, and he would do stuff as well. It was made to look like a piece of technology, an entertainment system. That was the buy-in to convince the parents just to buy it. Then afterwards, we can release the same old games and revive the market. The thing is, it worked exceptionally well, and within a number of years, as you can see on there, I've put Nintendo not only saved the market, the American market, and boosted the global markets, but it actually had as high as a 95% market share of the world's video game industry. Nintendo was in control that much, and a big part of that is this 10NES chip. Now, the 10NES chip doesn't exist in the Famicom, but the 10NES chip does exist in the Nintendo Entertainment Systems, the NES, that you'll see in Europe and America. And what that chip was something to counteract literally what happened to Atari. And that chip meant that any game that wasn't using an official Nintendo cartridge, which also made Nintendo money because you had to buy the cartridges from them. But anyone who wasn't using this, it would just reject the game, which meant that this flood of poor games capitalizing on a gold rush couldn't happen. You also had to have the Nintendo seal of quality in order to get the official cartridges from Nintendo. And interestingly, in order to ensure quality, Nintendo limited publishers to how many games they could release on the platform. If I'm not mistaken, I think it was even as low as 5 in a year. So, you had companies like, well, you can see some of the key games I put at the bottom, but you had companies like Konami and Capcom and Squaresoft actually having to plan effectively what games they were releasing and when on this platform because of the switch-in, the switch-in strategy. But it worked for Nintendo because it meant that the NES was just this golden library of games, and I'll come to them in a second. And we also have some interesting things as well, like the D-pad on the controllers. That D-pad, it was first seen on the Game & Watch Nintendo machine, but this is where it comes to prominence, and this is where what we all know as a video game console takes that de facto standard. This is the way a controller is designed. You have the D-pad created by Gunpei Yokoi, who I'll come to in a minute. He's also the inventor of the Game Boy, which goes on to be one of the most successful video game machines of all time, in part thanks to its bundling with Tetris, but mainly because of how cheap it was. It was only $90 on launch, the Game Boy, when it was released in the late 80s. It came with a game as well, and it worked on 4 batteries, which sounds crazy now, but was brilliant back in the day. I actually have somewhere around here, there it is, my Game Boy Color, because my original Game Boy is broken, but this one only took 2 batteries. But the Game Boy was black and white, but that didn't really matter. People still loved it, and it had all of those amazing games, but without much of the quality compromise. Of course, we also see that with this era, the technology was greater, so we were getting a lot of, more technologically advanced experiences of the time. And the other thing to know of this time is this is where key Japanese developers and publishers originate from. Some of the most famous names in gaming still to this day come from this era. And lastly, as a key event, you should never ever underestimate the power of World 1-1 in Super Mario Brothers. And what I mean by that is the first level. I mean, if I really leave you with anything, if you're designing games, and I'm sure you have done because it's like 101 game design, check out World 1-1 from Super Mario Brothers, the original one. Watch the videos. There's lots of videos where Miyamoto talks people through it online, because this is the masterclass in teaching people how to play a game with no manual, no instructions, just letting you learn how to play. You start, you're on the left of the screen, you walk forward because that's where the empty space is, you hit the middle, and now the camera sticks. You hit that first Goomba, okay, you just start again. You get past it, you carry on, it traps you into taking the mushroom, even though you've been hit by the Goomba. It's just a masterclass in level design, and it's definitely worth watching a lot of those videos on. Some of the key games of the 8-bit era, you know, Super Mario Brothers is not just a key game of the 8-bit era, it's one of the most influential games of all time, needs very little introduction. The Legend of Zelda, this is where Zelda starts. It's a massively important game, not just because of, you know, the experience and everything else like that, you know, the way it, you know, it had exploration, it has, you know, storytelling and all that. But actually, interestingly, when Shigeru Miyamoto designed The Legend of Zelda, he took a lot of inspiration from his upbringing in Kyoto, in the countryside. And he wanted to bring that, you know, limitless exploration and discovery that he felt as a child in the fields. And the reason why that's so important is it shows that this is where human, well, not this is where, but this is a key game where the human experience comes into the design factor, and that it's taking real life experiences. Tetris, Alexei Pachinov's seminal game, obviously drives the Game Boy forward, but it's on numerous platforms and is still, you know, one of the most influential games of all time. I absolutely adore Tetris. You know, some of the other games we've got pictured here, Ninja Gaiden. Ninja Gaiden with Ryu Hayabusa epitomizes that hard as nails gameplay that happened, that sort of, I'm going to go again and again and again and again. And that Dark Souls style of gaming can very much be seen squarely in Ninja Gaiden. I dare anyone to go and play those 8-bit games. I finished the first one, and it is not for the faint of heart. Contra's a great game where it brings about that shooting and run and gun mechanics, and it's especially important because it's where we start to see a lot of the two-player experiences coming in outside of the arcades. You know, here, take your second controller. Well, it's not your go, my go. It's let's play together. Obviously, you know, I can rattle off some of the other ones. You can see them there: Fire Emblem, Mega Man, Kirby, Final Fantasy, Metroid, Dragon Quest, Metal Gear, Castlevania. These all originate from now. Metal Gear, though, is an important one. Whilst it is on the NES, I implore you not to play the NES version. It's a altered, edited, and quite frankly, destroyed version of Hideo Kojima's original MSX game, Metal Gear, that obviously leads in eventually to Metal Gear Solid that we'll come to. But yeah, loads of epic RPGs, you know, and obviously great storytelling as well. Metroid's a famous one where they never actually told you the gender of Samus Aran throughout the game. It was considered one of the most shocking reveals in gaming at the time, that if you get to the secret ending and she pulls off the mask and, well, she's a female. And that was really powerful at a time where, you know, most of the gaming audience would have been male, and it would have been expected to be male. But, you know, Nintendo does what Nintendo does best. It pioneers new ways to play, it pioneers new ideas, and it pushes the boundaries of what gaming is. And we'll see that over and over again. But, you know, Metroid is really important, specifically the character of Samus Aran. Obviously, you know, the reason why I bring all these up is these are just franchises that still exist today, every single one of them, and they're not all Nintendo. Contra's seen better days, I'll admit, but the rest of them are all, you know, very much still here and still going strong, and they all originate and start in this era. So the images you'll see, in case you don't know, you know, obviously Tetris on the left, next to it we've got Final Fantasy, and underneath it Castlevania, Super Mario Brothers, and we've got Mega Man 2, a selection of all the different things. Mega Man 2 is one of the greatest games ever made, Keiji Inafune's masterpiece in my opinion, and it was one of the first games as well that gave you choice. You know, do you want to take on Metal Man first, or do you want to take on Bubble Man? Your choice. You make the story whichever way you want to go. So it gave them a lot. It gave people a lot of freedom, and it gave people a lot of strategy. Mega Man. Some of our key creators, well, Shigeru Miyamoto again. Shock horror. Keiji Inafune is in the bottom left of the square. He's the creator of Mega Man and someone who is still very much active today, leading Concept, who are a part of Level 5 Corporation, the creators of Layton and Yokai Watch. He's currently working on a range of titles. We'll know that, you know, in later years, his Mega Man revival under his own steam didn't quite go as he wanted in Mighty Number 9. But what a lot of people don't know is Azure Striker Gunvolt is very much a spiritual successor to Mega Man and still goes strong. And we're going to come to that later, because that's how a lot of these classic company people are now indie developers. But yeah, we've got Gunpei Yokoi, who you can see in the top left. He's not only the creator of the D-pad, but he's the creator of the Game Boy and is seminal in the work of titles such as Metroid. Sadly, he passed away in a car crash number of years later, and he's one of a few game designers, seminal important game designers, who sadly isn't still with us to this day. We've obviously, you've got Minoru Arakawa and Howard Lincoln, who led Nintendo of America, who I mentioned. Hironobu Sakaguchi is the creator of Final Fantasy, who I've got, this is blocking my images ever so slightly. Oh yeah, there's Miyamoto again. So yeah, you've got Hironobu Sakaguchi in the bottom right, and some other important people such as Masayuki Uemura from Nintendo, and Hiroshi Yamauchi was rather the president, CEO, and owner of Nintendo Corporation. What a lot of people don't know is Nintendo started in 1883 as a creator of card games, and it had its, I should have addressed this earlier, but it had its fingers in a lot of different pies. It ran a chain of love hotels at one point. It made toys for children, like I say, Hanafuda card games, a traditional Japanese card game. It did lots of things before it found its mark in the video game industry, and the Yamauchi family are the owners, and led Nintendo all the way up until Yamauchi's passing, when it was handed over in terms of the day-to-day running to various different people. And we'll get to that in a bit, but one of my heroes in the industry. The console wars. Well, this is the next era, and it's one of the most famous, if not the most famous era. It's the 16-bit era. It's when Sega and Nintendo go head-to-head. You can see some of the key platforms there, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, or Super Famicom, as it was known in Japan. This is a time, though, where gaming has revived. There's no need to masquerade it as an entertainment toy. I have here a Super Famicom. And to anyone who has a Super Nintendo in Europe, you'll know it's literally exactly the same, apart from it says Famicom. It was designed to look ever so slightly different in America, with a more muted color palette of purple and gray, whereas we in Europe, alongside Japan, got all the different colors and everything. So yeah, there was still some alterations, but nowhere near as much as we saw before. Obviously, this is where Sega comes in with the Mega Drive, or the Genesis if you're American. They also had a number of attachments to try and keep this console's life cycle going, including the 32X, which was another attachment add-on that, well, the 32 is the bits. It upped the bit to 32. Or the Mega CD, which was a range of FMV games. I'm going to get to them in a second. We also had the Game Gear. I'm looking for my Game Gear. Here's my Game Gear. This was Sega's attempt to challenge Nintendo's dominance in the portable gaming market. We've seen lots of people try. The Game Gear was great. It was in color, but it also costed double and took 6 batteries rather than 4. And it was a hog because those batteries only lasted about 3 hours. So whilst it did well-ish, it was nothing to compete with the Game Boy that lives on for a long time. The Game Boy goes for over a decade, well over a decade. I mean, the Game Boy is one of the powerhouse consoles of gaming that just lasts and lasts and lasts. I mean, if anyone thinks that our generations that we have today are long, check out the Game Boy's life. But yeah, some of the key events. Well, we have Sonic is created. Sonic the Hedgehog is created. Sega of America, it's interesting. Sega of America and Sega of Japan didn't talk to each other in the way that Nintendo Japan and Nintendo America did. Sega of America did a lot of things on their own, and we'll see that through the power of their celebrity and marketing that I mentioned, and the promotion of mature games. But nevertheless, Yuji Naka and a range of other people create Sonic the Hedgehog. We'll get to those people in a minute, where I'll point them out. But Sonic was very much created as the exact opposite of Mario. Mario was family friendly, he was cuddly, he was welcoming. Sonic was meant to be that epitome of the 90s. Edgy, radical, cool. That was Sonic the Hedgehog, and it worked. It worked very, very well. Sonic gave the Sega Mega Drive that extra oomph in the market. It was the cool alternative to Nintendo. It came as the package in. Where's my copy? There you go. One of the first games I had, there's Sonic the Hedgehog. It was the pack in with the Mega Drive, in the way that Tetris has been packed in with the Game Boy and Rob had been packed in with the NES. And yeah, it really spurred on this Nintendo versus Sega in the market. Nintendo had such a huge market share that they were able to carry on as they were. Sega had to think differently. They used the power of celebrity. And in order to make that point, I found a list of some of the launch games that were used as part of Sega's Genesis Does What Nintendo Don't marketing campaign. These included, and these are all in the titles of the games, Arnold Palmer's Tournament Golf, Tommy Lasorda's baseball, Pat Riley basketball, James Buster Douglas's knockout boxing, Joe Montana football, and Michael Jackson's Moonwalker that I have here, where Michael Jackson dances and jumps his way to save all the children who are being kept by the mafia. You did hear that right. While singing and dancing to tracks of his own, rendered in 8-bit. Michael Jackson actually has quite a lot to do with the Mega Drive. Interesting fact, you might wonder if you ever see any of the Sega Mega Drive collections, why Sonic the Hedgehog 3 very rarely appears in them, unless it's on PC. That is widely believed to be due to a music licensing problem, because secretly Michael Jackson wrote quite a few of the music tracks for Sonic the Hedgehog 3. The problem was a lot of the molestation charges came out at the time, so Michael Jackson's name was taken off, but they believe that the rights are still there, which causes many complications as to why when it comes to re-releasing Sonic the Hedgehog 3, and there are certain rules around re-releasing that title. Michael Jackson was also meant to do the work for Sonic and Knuckles, because Sonic and Knuckles is actually just Sonic 3 Part 2. They were meant to be the same game that was separated because work was taking too long, hence the lock-on that we see in this era. It's essentially one of the first ever DLCs, Sonic and Knuckles. Instead, Howard Drossin rewrote all the tracks for Sonic and Knuckles, as he had worked on some of the tracks from Sonic the Hedgehog 3. That's a little side note. But anyway, they really used this power of celebrity to promote their console and to get it in the faces of mainly Americans. Though, interestingly, Sega's strongest market, Sega never did too well in Japan. Nintendo continued to reign supreme with a 90+% market share, even during the console wars. Sega really took it to Nintendo in America, cutting and chipping away at their market share. But actually, Sega's strongest market was Europe, whereas the Mega Drive really took off. And even to this day, it's still hugely popular in Latin American countries, and specifically in Brazil. It's a very popular console. So yeah, they also used mature games. Nintendo had strict rules, as I alluded to before, about what could and couldn't be released. Famous games such as Mortal Kombat had fatalities edited, they had green blood, and a range of different things like that. Sega just said, do what you want. They were trying to attract that older market that had maybe grown up with gaming, but wanted something a bit more edgy. So yeah, we see a lot of that. Some of the key games of the era, well, you know, Super Mario World, The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, Super Metroid, some of these key games continue on. This is also the era where the Game Boy takes it to the next step with Pokemon, you know, Pokemon Red, Blue, Green. Green is an interesting one. I have some of the cartridges here. You can see red and green. These are the Japanese original cartridges. The blue actually came about because when they decided to promote the game in America, they thought red and blue would be better because it's the colors of the American flag. So it was actually originally red and green. You know, and I'll come to their creation in a minute when we look at the creators, but, you know, arguably, well, not arguably, it's just fact, Pokemon is, you know, Pokemon and Mario are the most successful gaming franchises of all time and the most influential. You know, Pokemon still goes strong to this day, and this is where it finds its origins. We all know that it's its anniversary this year. Pokemon was first released in 1996 in Japan. We wouldn't see it in Europe until 1998. If I'm not mistaken. Yeah, those numbers add up. Yeah. We saw some other key games of the era, and this is where you start to see some of the more, like I say, mature games. That's the word I was looking for. Streets of Rage. Go play Streets of Rage. It's one of my favorite games. I played it co-op with my brother. You have Koji Kondo and the music. Doom, Mortal Kombat, and Night Trap specifically are what bring about the ratings era in gaming. Before then, there were no ratings in gaming. They were seen as toys for kids. But the American government had become so worried. We still see this fear-mongering today about violence in games, but these games were so considered so controversial. You know, Doom and Mortal Kombat, I'm sure, need no introduction to you. Night Trap, on the other hand, is the game that you can see in the middle there with the three women, and they're real FMV sequences. And it was about a group of robbers breaking into a house, and you were manning the security cameras and trying to stop them. But ultimately, the point of the game is it had some quite, I mean, it's very campy. It's like a B horror movie. It's terrible. But at the time, you know, it had, you know, sexual content. It had a lot of violence within it, but it was also using real people, and it, you know, scared the American senators and lawmakers to the point where they wanted to regulate gaming. The gaming industry instead created the ESA, the Entertainment Software Association, that actually run E3, and they agreed to make their own rating system in order to rate games. This caused a wave where we then started to see, you know, what we have now as PEGI in Europe. Japan has Zero, lots of other rating boards, but that comes about here because where gaming starts to become more mature. Some of the key games, obviously Sonic the Hedgehog comes from here, and Donkey Kong Country is a really interesting game because this game and the whole series produced graphics on the Super Famicom, Super Nintendo, that no one thought could be done. And that was done through using scrolling backgrounds, a skill that was used during the Resident Evil remake that we only just saw re-released on the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, but obviously originated from the GameCube and still looks phenomenal to this day. Donkey Kong Country was really considered a masterpiece and battled back against the Mega Drive's "Look, we're more powerful" marketing campaign. Nintendo actually even fought back in a marketing campaign that was equally attacking as the Nintendo does what Sega does what Nintendo don't. And they did an equally combative one, which is, you can't get this on Sega, and it was Donkey Kong. So yeah, some of the key people of the era: Shigeru Miyamoto again, Yuji Naka, Naoto Oshima, and Hirokazu Yasuhara, creators of Sonic the Hedgehog there. Key names within Sega of Japan, although all the marketing and promotion was done in Sega of America. It's very confusing, and it's something that caused a lot of problems for Sega. Tom Kalinske led Sega of America. He led all those marketing campaigns, and he is the key figure in the book Console Wars that was recently turned into a documentary done by Seth Rogen, I believe. He's a key figure in Sega's success and Sega taking on Nintendo at the time. Obviously, Rare. This is where we start to see a lot of the companies as well, but like Rare were the creators of Donkey Kong Country, now owned by Microsoft, but at the time were a Nintendo second-party studio, so they exclusively made for Nintendo but weren't owned by them, and they made all the Donkey Kong Country games and a range of other titles, including Star Fox Adventures, which was on the GameCube. Rare are based in Britain as well. Capcom, obviously we see a lot of their games coming out around now, you know, like I said, Mega Man and the like. Konami, a lot of their games originate here, like Castlevania and Contra. Squaresoft, not Square Enix, Squaresoft, because Squaresoft is the makers of Final Fantasy. Enix were the makers of Dragon Quest, obviously both made a lot more games. They later merged to create Square Enix that you see today. But at the time, they were simply Squaresoft, and Enix were Enix. And ID Software, John Carmack, John Romero, and the rest of the team, the creators of Doom, this is where they come about. And in many ways epitomize that sort of home creation of gaming and growing from the ground up. It's the 32-bit era and the era of the 3D. We can see this is where Sony enters with the PlayStation. We have the ill-fated Sega Saturn and Nintendo 64, and the Game Boy still goes strong with its Game Boy Color iteration. Now, this is an era where PlayStation really starts to, you know, really emerges and starts to take a lot of control in the industry. We see 3D polygon gaming coming in, and obviously PlayStation really wanted to attract rather mature gamers with longer gaming experiences, and this is where Western gaming sort of refines its feet again, and Sega's downfall begins. There's a lot that goes into this, but I'll keep it brief. Essentially, Nintendo were going to make a disc-based add-on for their Super Nintendo, Super Famicom, which was going to be called two words, PlayStation. They were building this in in conjunction with Sony. But Hiroshi Yamauchi actually pulled out at the last minute, deeming it not needed, and he really didn't want to work with, not necessarily didn't want to work with another company, but didn't feel that Nintendo needed to work with another company in order to be successful. So they secretly ditched the project. And Sony, unhappy with that, decided to continue it on and created the PlayStation. It's arguably considered one of Nintendo's bigger blunders that they have done. They don't have many, but this would be one of them. And even more importantly, both Sega and Nintendo make key errors at this point, key unenforced errors that allow PlayStation to take a greater level of control. The PlayStation, like the Sega Saturn, obviously went with CDs. CDs were so cheap to produce. They were about, I think if I'm not mistaken, 50p, so what would that be? It's clearly, around 50 cents, to create. However, the cartridges still ran into the dollars. And that was a hit that the publisher had to take, the developer. Nintendo also continued to manage their strict rules on what could and couldn't be published. And they didn't release the Nintendo 64 until around a year and a half after the PlayStation. So they'd lost the sort of mind share as well. And at this point, they lost key publishing partners, most famously of all, through these actions, such as Control, backing cartridge still instead of CD, was they lost Squaresoft, and they lost Final Fantasy VII that was originally wanting to be developed for the Nintendo 64. This is fundamentally important in Sony's growth because they started to attract all of these key third-party publishers, and still to this day work with third-party publishers in a critical way. A lot of people working with Nintendo were wondering, well, how do we stand above Nintendo games? Well, go to PlayStation was kind of the attitude. Sega Saturn, on the other hand, they dropped a number of unenforced errors, which contributed to, which was still a part of this, the two parties not talking together, and as in America and Europe. And part of that would be that they actually thought it would be a nice surprise to reveal at a conference that the Sega Saturn would go on sale, I think, within the next month. Well, this was before the internet era, really. This didn't give the retailers time to stock properly. It didn't give them time to take pre-orders. It didn't give the developers time to get games ready. It was an unmitigating disaster. Not only that, but Sega's first-party studios ran into a level of turmoil at this time and couldn't agree on what they were and weren't creating, which actually led us to the point where we didn't have a mainline Sonic the Hedgehog game for the Sega Saturn. Personally, I loved the Sega Saturn, but it had a lot of problems at the time. The Nintendo 64 didn't sell as well as Nintendo had hoped because it lost power to PlayStation. But at the same time, arguably the Nintendo 64 has some of the most influential games of all time created for it, which we'll get to in just a second. But yes, Sega's downfall starts to occur around now, thanks in part to their mistakes, also because of PlayStation's entry into the market that was kind of attracting literally what they were attracting, mature market, all those sorts of things. But the PlayStation were doing it by also taking the third-party publishers at the same time. So this is a key era where things start to switch, and adult topics were starting to be approached as well. In a game no more clearly seen than in some of these games you'll see here. Resident Evil is obviously a PlayStation 1 title. Metal Gear Solid, which talks about, it's the ultimate political game. It's about nuclear de-armament, nuclear warfare, terrorism, espionage. It's a phenomenal game. I mean, I hope everyone here has played Metal Gear Solid. If you haven't, grab it, play it. I'm literally only just playing it again, and it still holds up to this day. I'd even implore you to play the PS1 original rather than the Nintendo GameCube remake, the Twin Snakes, because I think it has a better, more pure storytelling. Anyway, Resident Evil comes about here. Final Fantasy VII, which again, is about corporation control. I mean, I'm sure most people have actually played the remake that's just been done. Tomb Raider. The other thing that's interesting in you'll see in a lot of these games here as well is a lot of these games are franchises not only still exist today, but we've remade. Resident Evil 2 has been remade only recently, so is Resident Evil 3. Final Fantasy. Tomb Raider was rebooted. Super Mario 64 was re-released as part of the collection. Key FIFA comes from here, although Madden came from an era before. There were other FIFA games before, but this is where it really starts to take off in the era. GoldenEye pioneered that shooting. But like I said, the N64 has some of the most influential games of all time. GoldenEye is one of them. I'm not sure how well it holds up today, but The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time and Super Mario 64 are still considered to be seminal titles that changed game design fundamentally. And also, this is where we see the first Grand Theft Auto come out. Not the Grand Theft Auto you know today, but Grand Theft Auto nonetheless, Half-Life as well. And Nights into Dreams is an interesting one because it actually became the Sega Saturn's key game. And interestingly, I've got an N64 controller here because this is where the analog stick comes in. Most people think the first one was the N64, but actually the first analog stick on a home console was on the Sega Saturn, and it was built for Nights into Dreams specifically. So yeah, some of the key makers, well, Hideo Kojima, who you know is the creator of Metal Gear Solid and Death Stranding recently. Amy Hennig is a key creator. You'll know her later on probably as the creator of Uncharted, but she also was a key influence here at the time working for Crystal Dynamics on the Legacy of Kain series, Soul Reaver, which pioneered that open world gaming along with the likes of Legend of Zelda. It's a game well worth checking out, Soul Reaver. So definitely have a look into that if you're interested. Eiji Onuma, who you can see in the top right, at this point he takes over the Legend of Zelda creations and still to this day leads creation of the Legend of Zelda. Along with Miyamoto, and probably has the combined highest Metacritic of any designer in video game history. Arguably, I haven't done my numbers there, but he is super influential and successful. Electronic Arts had obviously been quite influential in the 16-bit era, but they really start to, get these annualized franchises down at this time. Naughty Dog are here with Crash Bandicoot and Insomniac Spyro. Shinji Mikami, who I actually have a picture of later on, but Shinji Mikami is the creator of Resident Evil and is considered a father of survival horror, reinventing it multiple times, in fact. So very important. Tetsuya Nomura, Final Fantasy VII designer and creator. You've got Dave Jones and Mike Daly in the bottom left. Dave Jones specifically created, I think, am I right here? DMA Design, could be, yes, definitely DMA Design in Dundee. That was later bought and evolved into Rockstar North, creators of the original Grand Theft Auto there. And Ken Kutaragi in the bottom right, who continued the PlayStation after Nintendo dropped out and is known as the father of the PlayStation, even to this day. So yeah, the 6th generation, this is where we get rid of the bits. Ironically, this focus on power and numbers really has come back in the recent era with 4K and 1080 and 720 and 480p. But at this point, it's technically the 128-bit era, but no one really bothers shouting about that anymore. Key platforms of the time, well, this is where we actually have quite a number going on. We have the PlayStation 2, which is the joint most successful video game console of all time. The GameCube from Nintendo. Very interesting fact, whilst most people think of it as a failure, up until this point, Nintendo had sold every single console at a profit. So actually, the GameCube, whilst not necessarily being successful to the consumer's eyes, for Nintendo, was still a pretty successful console. They didn't make a loss on it. So Nintendo were pretty happy with the GameCube. The Dreamcast, which I have one behind me, is sadly Sega's finale. It was only really on the market for 2 years. It was way ahead of its time. And we'll come to that in a minute. The Xbox then comes from Microsoft, and this is where the American consoles really start to come back. And interestingly, in many ways, the Xbox can be seen as the successor to the Dreamcast. I'll go into why momentarily. But Game Boy Advance, Game Boy finally gives up the ghost here, and we move on to Game Boy Advance, which just steps up everything. It moves to color fully now. We see experiences like Pokemon, Ruby and Sapphire and Emerald, and Steam originates in this era. Before that, we still had discs for PC and installs. This is where Steam really comes about, and digital starts to take control in the PC market. But yeah, the PlayStation takes control. It sells well over 100 million units, partly due to the fact that it had a DVD player, partly because it had the swelling of third-party support due to the PlayStation 1 success. Also Sega had folded their business, which gave PlayStation even more support. Microsoft enters with a focus on Western gamers, which arguably is what Sega had been doing for a long time. They also took key people from the Dreamcast, such as Peter Moore, to head up the division. And famously, there was actually people who wanted Microsoft to buy Sega, but Bill Gates turned that down, ironically. It then went on to cost Microsoft around $1 billion to get into the console market solidly. So a lot of people think that, you know, they could have fast-tracked that by buying Sega and having a wealth of franchises, but maybe then we wouldn't have had games like Halo. You know, Japan's industry starts to enter an era of decline at this point. Games more and more also start to talk about political and societal issues of the time, such as, you know, like we see in Grand Theft Auto and even Halo in terms of the way it talks about warfare. And then obviously annualized franchises become common, as does the dual analog stick and online gaming. Most people attribute that to Xbox Live, but again, it was way ahead of its time. The Sega Dreamcast actually was the first console with online gaming. And also, I've got a controller here. It also had a little screen inside of the controller as well, interestingly, which is something that we see more and more to this day. So yeah, some of the key games from this era. Well, Resident Evil 4. It's my favorite game of all time. It's a game that reinvented not just survival horror, but action. It is one of the most important games of all time, Resident Evil 4, and that came out at this time for the GameCube. It was originally a GameCube exclusive. Capcom released a range of games exclusively for GameCube as part of their continued support. They'd supported the Sega. In many ways, Capcom have always seemed like a reluctant supporter of Sony. They backed Dreamcast and then moved on to backing GameCube. Before that, they've been big supporters of Nintendo. They've also, in subsequent years, put a lot of support behind Microsoft. So that's just an interesting thing. But yeah, some of the key games you'll see here: Metroid Prime, which takes Metroid into that third person era, but really takes a shooter, but has it more as an adventure. Smash Brothers Melee comes out here. Grand Theft Auto 3. This is where the Hauser brothers and Rockstar North school of Grand Theft Auto takes hold in GTA 3, and we then go on to see Vice City and San Andreas in the same era. Shenmue, Portal, Knights of the Old Republic with its famous twist. I won't tell you if you've never played it, but it has one of the greatest twists in gaming. And yeah, a range of other games that you can see there: Wind Waker, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, Shadow of the Colossus, Team Ico's games, Sims, World of Warcraft, so many great games from this era. And some of the key creators, Hideki Kamiya, who created Devil May Cry, as you can see Dante at the bottom. And before that, he'd worked on games like Resident Evil 2 as the lead developer, between Shinji Mikami's work on the other games in the series. Yu Suzuki is actually maybe more famously known for games like Outrun and Space Harrier in the 16-bit era, but I added him here because he created Shenmue, which came out in this era. And Shenmue really, again, pioneered a lot of that open world storytelling, exploration of real world places, and is a spiritual successor to the Yakuza series that we see today. Fumito Ueda and Team Japan, obviously anyone who's been following the news will know that Sony have just closed down Team Japan as part of a renewed focus on America, something, I think is a really sad turn of events, because Team Japan and Fumito Ueda, he'd left before, actually, around the time of The Last Guardian, made some of the most amazing and interesting games. And in this era specifically, some of the most artistic games: Ico, Shadow of the Colossus, and later on, The Last Guardian, although that's PS3. BioWare come about now, still independent, not owned by EA. Neversoft, who made Tony Hawk's Pro Skater and the Guitar Hero series. So, really bringing in a range of different experiences. Gabe Newell founder of Valve, creates Steam with his team. Sam and Dan Hauser and Rockstar North, I've already mentioned. Peter Moore takes over at Xbox after leading Dreamcast at Sega. And Peter Molyneux, at the time, creator of Fable, comes about and obviously then goes on to be quite influential in the indie market. So yeah, we're getting there now. We're at the point where gaming reinvents itself, and what I've termed the motion era. This is where Nintendo comes back with a bang. PlayStation starts to falter due to well, the word we use is hubris, this idea that they were untouchable, and they weren't untouchable. They released the PlayStation very late in Europe, the PS3. It was massive. It had a humongous price tag. It had barely any exclusives on launch. And most people widely know the PlayStation 3's launch as a failure, and then they really picked it up and brought it back in quite spectacular fashion. But nothing compares to the Nintendo Wii. I like my accessories, if you can't tell. And the Nintendo Wii was codenamed Revolution and really was a revolution for the industry. Xbox really showed some steel at this point with the 360. They were able to knuckle down and show that they're here to stay. They're not a flash in the pan like some old consoles had been. the Nintendo DS also comes about here. This is where Satoru Iwata, a personal hero of mine, took over at Nintendo after Hiroshi Yamauchi stood down. And Nintendo started to think with blue sky thinking, is what they call it in business. And what that is thinking, do you know what? We're not going to take on PlayStation and Xbox. We're going to do something very different. We're not going to release at the same time. We're going to release at different times. We're going to do something different. We're going to go after a different market. Whilst keeping the market we've got. And it really was revolutionary, as per the code name. And that's also what they did with the DS and the touch screen. And yeah, Nintendo recovers, but does it in spectacular fashion. It goes on to become one of the most valued companies in the world, with a war chest of money that they still have today, where they could survive a couple of console failures before they'd even be in trouble. They pioneered motion control, and as part of that brought in a lot of people who would never have considered themselves gamers. This is the point where gaming expands to, your mums, your dads. I'll always remember my granddad playing Wii bowling and really getting into it and loving it. And every week he'd be like, "Have you brought the Wii machine with you?" And this is what the Nintendo did. We also see challengers to Nintendo's console area. The PSP comes about at this time. It's hugely successful in Japan, hugely successful, but couldn't quite replicate that in the West. Steam continues to go from strength to strength, and we see the fledgling mobile market coming about here with the iPhone and Android beginning, albeit in the early days. Well, we see Nokia try with the N-Gage as well. A really cool little thing, but obviously was superseded by the iPhone and Android platforms in many ways. But yeah, anyway, Nintendo courts non-gamers. It brings in, these are then further brought in, these non-gamers, basically the wider market through smartphones. And we see more and more annualized releases. Digital really takes control at this point, and that brings us to the indies. Indies are allowed to come about and be a part of things much more fully now. And indie development really takes hold at this point. Free to play starts to emerge in the mobile gaming market, and so does DLC and alternate monetization methods become more common. This is where we start to see the online passes, Xbox Live subscriptions, download content. All of that starts to become much more common now. And finally, a thing I didn't truly mention at the top, but Nintendo Direct. This is where, again, another pioneering idea from Satoru Iwata, that we should just talk directly to the consumers. And this is something that's so prevalent today, you'd think it's normal, but this idea of using YouTube and social media to talk directly to the consumer and bypass things like E3, GDC, all those sorts of things. This is something Nintendo pioneered through the Nintendo Direct. Some of the key games in this reinvention era, you'll see some of our key franchises here. Modern Warfare. Modern Warfare is a hugely influential title where I don't want to spoil things, but there's lots that goes on there in terms of characterization, storytelling on war, and actually the core gaming mechanics of it. The Last of Us comes in here with its gritty, grounded storytelling of, a post-apocalyptic world, and loads of games here. Mass Effect 2 Suicide Mission is influential, and obviously Mass Effect did the thing where your stories carry on through 1 into 2 into 3. Uncharted 2 Among Thieves basically becomes the epitome of the video game as a movie. We see Angry Birds come about. I used to work for Chilingo, who published the first Angry Birds made by Rovio, so it's a game pretty close to me. There's Angry Birds stuff everywhere. Metal Gear Solid, Guns of the Patriots. Hideo Kojima, although there were more games to come, he closes off the final chapter of the story because the other games that come happen in the middle of the storyline. We see games like Wii Sports and Skyward Sword that really epitomize that motion control, and Spec Ops and its commentary, and Monster Hunter and games like that use bringing people together as a community gaming experience. And Professor Layton and Ace Attorney bring in those people who love stories, and just so many. Portal, Gears of War becomes a seminal Xbox title. Assassin's Creed begins here, and you can see Ezio there. Street Fighter comes back with a bang. I think I put Wii Sports twice on that list. I did. Maybe I meant Wii Sports Resort. Anyway, shows you can't get everything right. There you go. And you can see some of these games at the bottom. Journey is a seminal indie title that showed what could be done. We've got Bioshock with, Would You Please, as anyone will know. Minecraft, of course. So loads of amazing influential games. Here's some of the key figures. I'll come to Satoru Iwata last because he's someone very important to me. But Reggie Fils-Aimé leads Nintendo of America and continues that talking directly to people approach. You've got, you know, Peter Moore continues on at this point. Aya Kyogoku, who you can see in the top right, she leads Nintendo E&D Division 5, which is known for Animal Crossing, among many other games. So she leads this this boom that we've seen with Animal Crossing today. You know, Jade Redmond at the time, we've just seen she's just opened a new studio with PlayStation. At the time, leads one of the divisions at Ubisoft responsible for Assassin's Creed. Ken Levine creates Bioshock. We've got tons of indie developers. You know, Amy Hennig continues at this time with Assassin's Creed. You know, we've got Kim Swift and Kaylee Santiago creating experiences, you know, such as Portal, and helping set up that game company with Yonova Chen, who created Journey, respectively, of course. Strali and Druckmann, who worked on Uncharted 2 and then go on to create The Last of Us here. Weston Zampella, who created Modern Warfare, and then went on to create Respawn Entertainment, that's responsible for Titanfall and most recently Apex Legends. Akihiro Hino and Level 5 really pioneered those Professor Layton games, and as we'll see, make Yokai Watch. Cliff Baczynski. You know, you can see all the names, but these are just some of the people. But Satoru Iwata for me is the kind of like the MVP of this era. He revived Nintendo's fortunes. He brought in so many people. I mean, I think, you know, his influence should never, ever be underestimated. And, you know, he sadly passed away from complications due to cancer, and is one of the, along with Gunpei Yokoi, one of the few people that we have lost in gaming, because it's a youngish industry. And, you know, one of his most famous quotes, he has two. One of his most famous quotes is, you know, I may be a CEO on my business card, but in my heart, I'm a gamer. And another one is, I may be getting the quote slightly wrong, but ultimately the quote was, gaming should be and always will be for everyone. It's not meant to be for gamers, for this, for that, for the other. It's meant to be for everyone. And he really pioneered that through DS and through the Nintendo Wii and through everything that Nintendo represented, through creating experiences that were for everyone. And also sort of taking Nintendo out of that battle for, you know, graphics and power and saying, we don't need that. You know, like, we can just create these amazing experiences without that. So yes, Satoru Iwata is a personal legend of mine. He started at HAL Laboratories, which created Kirby. After they got into a lot of trouble, he then went on to take over HAL Laboratories before being brought into Nintendo. To anyone who doesn't know, he's hugely influential in Super Smash Brothers and in taking Pokemon global, such as, you know, creating arguments that Pokemon, they shouldn't edit. They wanted to make it more monstrous with vicious animals, and him alongside someone who I think I missed, but I shouldn't have done, because again, another one of my heroes is Satoshi Tajiri, who created Pokemon. They wanted to keep that core cute cuddly element that you see, like you see in Pikachu, and it's for the best that they did that. They really stood their ground and kept Pokemon pure. And I don't think it would have been successful if they'd have fully Americanized Pokemon. Pokemon is successful because it is what it is. And Pokemon, a lot of people don't know, I'm going backwards here, and I promise I'll get back on track to finish my presentation very quickly. But you'll notice if you've played Pokemon that the opening world is Kanto. Well, Kanto is actually the region, the real life region in Japan where Tokyo is based. And all of the first few regions are based on the regions of Japan. And Satoshi Tajiri created the game to bring back, again, much like Miyamoto, that love of bug catching that he felt in his youth, because bug catching is a big thing in Japan. And the message behind Pokemon is to sort of get back to nature and to, you know, love nature and be one with it and be part of it. And that was something that Satoru Iwata and Satoshi Tajiri felt very passionately about, you know, its messages, you know, beyond battling, and fought to keep that. So yeah, it's really sad what happened to Satoru Iwata. And if anyone wants to know more about him and games that were created as part of this opening up Nintendo, he did a series called Iwata Asks. Just Google it, Iwata Asks. And it's a range of interviews that were done with all people like Aya Kyogoku, Shigeru Miyamoto, Eiji Onuma, all different people at Nintendo. So many people I've even forgotten to mention. So yeah, definitely go check that out, because there's some really fascinating interviews in there around games like the making of Majora's Mask, the successor to Ocarina of Time. But yeah, last one now before we get to the modern era, which is just a quick slide, but we've got the one that you'll all know, and I'm sure I don't have to go over it as much, but the PS4, the Xbox One, Wii U and Switch, because Nintendo did away with competing with the rest. And so actually we see two consoles in this generation from Nintendo. The 3DS, because obviously the Switch is the successor to both the Wii U and the 3DS in many respects. The PS Vita comes, but sadly, it's hugely successful in Japan again, but then Sony decide to step back from portable market. This is just my opinion, but I think mainly that comes from Sony's renewed focus on the American market, and the Vita was not successful in the American market and Europe. It was more successful in Japan, but Sony seems to be more positioned to focus on the American market, which I have my opinions on, but I think time will tell, as it always does. PC, more store platforms emerge. We obviously, at this point, indie publishing has become very easy now through iOS, through the App Store, through Google Play, but we've also got Epic Game Store, we've got Itch, we've got all Steam Greenlights come about, there's loads of stuff here. But yeah, re-releases at this point become more common. I think at this point, like I said, later on, power of retro as well. Gaming starts to embrace its past, but apart from Nintendo, a lot of companies seem to have this idea that we have to remake and make them look fancy, which is something I don't necessarily disagree with. I'm a huge retro gamer. As I've said, it's my speciality. So I think you can dive straight into Super Mario World and it's going to be better than if it was remade with fancy graphics, although that's not to say some of the remakes aren't phenomenal, like Final Fantasy VII and Resident Evil and all these. So anyway, there's good and there's bad there. Some of the older games that are remade, definitely worthwhile, but we also in this era start to see things like The Last of Us Remastered, a game that was only released 2 years earlier. And there's positives and negatives on that front. Nintendo Switch have obviously re-released most of the Wii U games. So we start to see that trend at this point now. Digital becomes a key thing. Many key franchises see their anniversaries. I mean, Super Mario, Pokemon, Sonic the Hedgehog's got an anniversary this year, like Pokemon. So, there's loads and loads of anniversaries. I mean, Assassin's Creed seeing anniversaries. We also start to see at this point as well, like I said, Satoru Iwata sadly passes away, but we also start to see things like Gamergate and ethics in gaming. This is where the consumers start to truly get involved in the development process much more through our interconnected internet lives. But also we get to the point now where people are not willing to just always accept things. We've had the Me Too movement in gaming, and and a lot of the way games are made and the way people are treated, such as crunch and everything like that really comes to the forefront and should come to the forefront, because gaming is for all of us, and that includes the people who make it. And we should be looking after the people who make the games that we love, because I'm sure a lot of you lot in here watching are going to be the future of game creation. And I hope that, the experiences that you guys get are actually absolutely amazing, like the indies I work with. But as I point out with indies, we start to see a lot of the key names now going indie because they want that, not just the lifestyle that they want, but they want they want to be in control of their own creations. I mean, in fact, in many ways, Nintendo are one of the only companies that managed to keep hold of a lot of their key talent at this point, as we'll see in a minute. The Chinese market enters here and so do other markets such as Korea, because China and Korea, interestingly, had been blocked out from being a part of the console market, specifically because Japanese products were banned there after the war, but now we start to see consoles being released finally in China. And obviously Korea has a massive PC market that really takes hold with things like PC bangs and the internet era. And anyone who watches esports will know the Korean esports is some of the best in the world. We also get indie and A-tier publishers, much like Chorus Worldwide that I work for. There's a plug. Some of the key games of this era. I mean, I'm sure you've played every single one of these. These are the games of the last few years, even of last year, maybe even of this year. Breath of the Wild, Eiji Aonuma takes another near 10 out of 10 game. We've got Ghost of Tsushima, which is a really interesting one, because a lot of the time what we've seen is Japanese developers making experiences that are super successful in the West that represent Western maybe ideals, such as Metal Gear Solid. But this is a Western game created in Seattle that comes over to Japan representing Japanese ideals and is hugely successful. And in fact, Sucker Punch have been made honorary key keepers, I think, of the island of Tsushima, because it's a real place. And in fact, the Famitsu, Japan's #1 gaming magazine, goes to Tsushima Game of the Year. So this is really at a point where you can see that multicultural blend seeping into both. God of War obviously comes back with a bang. There's a lot of PlayStation games in here. Pokemon I added because we have Pokemon Black and White here, and this shows how Pokemon still goes from strength to strength, because this is a game that was released in 2010, 2011, and has a brand new, all new Pokemon. I think we're up to about 800 and something, 900. I'm a huge Pokemaniac, but I'm also bad with numbers, so I can't ever remember the exact number. But yeah, you know, Red Dead's here, Animal Crossing, Dark Souls. You can see more. One of my favorite series that you should go try if you haven't is Yakuza. Especially in these times during the pandemic, it's a great way to just go and experience life in cities in Japan for a little bit. And it really tells that sort of film noir storytelling, but with a bit of comedy and a bit of seriousness. I completely, pardon the language, but I completely stan Kiryu Kazuma, so definitely check that series out. You know, got some of the biggest hitting mobile games this year as well. Clash of Clans, Clash Royale, you know, Angry Birds goes from strength to strength, you know, Candy Crush is in there. We also see the Battle Royale games emerge, like Fortnite and PUBG, that really, you know, in Fortnite's case, strengthens Epic Games. We start to see people like musicians doing concerts in Fortnite. GTA 5 continues. Yokai Watch is an interesting one because a lot of people might not have heard of it, but it was massive in Japan and still is. And it's very much like Pokemon. Yokais are Japanese spirits, but it's made by Level 5, the makers of Professor Layton. I'm playing it at the moment, and it's a really cute and lovely game. Monster Strike and Puzzles and Dragons are two of the biggest mobile games in Japan. And interestingly, with the mobile game era, we start to see a little bit of regionalization going on, where games are popular in some areas and not so much in others. But yeah, you know, massive games come about now. And by massive, I mean production value, length, the amount of work that goes into them, but also hugely successful indie games like Celeste, Gone Home, you know, loads of them come about here as well. So we really get this point where you've got AAA experiences and you've got indie experiences, and ever so slowly you've got the return of that A market through people like THQ Nordic, you know, and Focus Home Interactive, who offer some amazing, what we used to call A-tier games. So we're really at an era where there's something for everyone now, and that's just amazing. Some of the key makers, well, Sony Worldwide Studios really embeds itself during the PS4 era. The PS4 is hugely successful. Xbox One, I'm sure we all know why it faltered. They went for the all-in-one, it does everything. They tried to force the digital when the market wasn't quite ready for it. And the Xbox One was a disaster. Whereas Series X is doing great now. So in many ways, we've seen Microsoft make the same mistake that Sony made with the PS3. And learn from it and grow. So yeah, Sony Worldwide Studios, now led by Herman Hulst, but before then led by Shuhei Yoshida, who now leads the indie side of the PlayStation business. I think I did have a picture of Shuhei Yoshida up before. Really cool guy. I've met him in person. He's lovely. He's such a nice person. And I think it's really great he's leading the indie push, because I think it means that more and more indies will arrive on PS4 and PS5. Corey Balrog creates, he's created all the Grand Theft Auto games, but kind of reinvents it and brings it into that Sony Worldwide Studios brand. Sony are creating a brand, much like Nintendo have a brand as well. It's very smart. Eiji Onuma again, Sucker Punch, creators of Ghost of Tsushima. Obviously, Supercell go on to become one of the world's biggest gaming corporations, alongside King and Rovio in the mobile sector. Obviously, Epic Games. Remedy. I put Remedy in because I think Remedy are the epitome of a studio that constantly turns out great hits and doesn't necessarily overwork their budget. I mean, and they've created this kind of like Marvel-esque connected universe. I'm sure a lot of you will have played games like Control, Alan Wake, Quantum Break, and obviously before that they were published by Rockstar with Max Payne. Remedy are a really great studio, and they show that you don't have to be the likes of Capcom or Square to survive in this industry. As in the middle tier, indies obviously survive for different reasons, but yeah, really great. Toshihiro Nagoshi is the leader of Ryuga Gotoku Studio, who create Yakuza. And then we see the likes of Koji Igarashi, who you can see in the bottom left, the creator of Castlevania, and Keiji Inafune, who created Mega Man. And then at Platinum Games, you've got the likes of Hideki Kamiya, all of which have gone indie, so that they have their own control. Koji Igarashi, who created Castlevania, now creates Bloodstained Ritual of the Night, which is just a spiritual successor. Shinji Mikami even has gone independent. Well, I say independent. He did create Ghostwire, the creators of Ghostwire Tokyo, the studio there, and but they were bought by Bethesda, who are now owned by Microsoft. So he is back in the Microsoft bubble. But you get the idea. A lot of these great creators. Hey, I mean, Hideo Kojima done it with Kojima Productions. We're thinking, well, maybe it's time for us to do something for ourselves. So there is so much scope to do something for yourself in this industry, big names and new names alike. And yeah, just the current era. I think we all know this. Switch has gone from strength to strength and is so popular. The PC market just continues to boom and grow. We've got new games coming. We also, interestingly, we see the way games are being consumed changing. Xbox Game Pass is massive. The Switch is obviously that hybrid, that it's everything Nintendo ever wanted. It's a home console on the go. We've got this increased pressure on loot box mechanics and the way games are purchased. Obviously, the pandemic has affected games for positive and negative ways. It's given people so many escapes from the pandemic, and has also helped a lot of indies, but it's also hurt a lot of indies as well, and a lot of bigger studios. And, indie development continues massively. Xbox is back with a bang with the Xbox Series XS, which I'm a big fan of the Series S personally, and I think that's doing really well. And we've also seen the likes of really high profile failures as well, which shows you don't actually have to make these massive games to be a success. Cyberpunk 2077 is the epitome of that was rushed out. We've got problems of crunch and other stuff, and hasn't done so well. Compared to the likes of, well, I'd put it there, but like Celeste, the smaller game from an indie developer. So yeah, and just as you can see across the bottom, tons of our most loved franchises continue to this day, whilst new ones continue to emerge. And yeah, just some conclusions. It's a young industry, but it's gone through many changes, and it's constantly evolving. It's increasingly, increasing diversity, variation, and complexity, but it's still got so much to, so much work to do to represent equally those who consume the games, and we're still getting there, but we're getting better. Strong brand power. These are brands like Pokemon and Mario that even if you've never played a game in your life, and they stand the test of time as well. Gaming has stood the test of time. There's been so many doomsayers, but gaming has consistently persisted and is such an exciting industry to be a part of. Like I say, it manages to blend the best bits of all of the creative industries into one, in my opinion. Music, film, storytelling, art, it blends them all into one amazing creation. And you can just tell so many different stories and visit different worlds and inspire so many people at the same time. And yeah, and if there's one last thing I can leave you with, I might sound a little bit like a fangirl for Nintendo, but never rule Nintendo out. There's always something interesting that's going to come from them. Though I own every console. I'm a massive PlayStation fan. I'm a huge Xbox fan as well. And trust me, if Sega were to return, I would be there day one, camping out for my Sega console, and all the games as well. So yes, I know I've gone on way much longer than I should have done, but I'm going to stop the sharing now, let Patty come back in, and yeah, that's my talk.
But you can talk as much as I told you that you wouldn't have any problem doing this presentation, no matter what. I could leave you and you would talk until tomorrow.
Yeah, to everyone in the audience, thank you for listening. Thank you for sticking with me. Like I say, it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the industry. I hope what I've left you with is some interesting facts you maybe didn't know, and maybe just some inspirations to go and check out new things, play some games you hadn't heard of, go and explore and, learn more for yourself as well. It's something I always do. Like Patty knows all full too well. I've written books, I've done a master's, but my life goal is to write a PhD in video games. So, hopefully I will be able to achieve that.
Before you go, I wanted to ask you a few things. Like, people here are shy, but yeah, I have a few questions for you.
Sure.
One of the things is that a lot of people nowadays, especially this younger generation, they have in mind that games is all about esports and the playing together, the whole community. And they don't understand, for example, that esports is something that exists since the 1970s.
Yeah.
That we used to have these competitions in arcade, and it was the like we had these massive tours around the United States with Tetris.
Yeah, it's something interesting that I actually didn't go into, but I'm sure I could have gone on a lot longer. But obviously, the famous company is Twin Galaxies, who led the leaders scoreboards for arcade games, and such as trying to hit the top scores. One of the most famous documentaries of it's well worth a watch. It's fascinating. It's like reality television with gaming and documentary merged into one. It's called The King of Kong, and it's Billy Mitchell, and it's his story of taking the title of Donkey Kong High Score, but then there's cheating involved and all that sort of stuff. It's a fascinating documentary. So Twin Galaxies, The King of Kong. And yeah, the point is gaming's always been competitive. As you say, Patty, we've always had a level of esports. We think of esports now as connected, but it always was connected and social. It was posting high scores. It was sending in tapes to magazines, taking pictures. Nintendo Power used to have a guide of how you would take a picture to send it in to compete with people. And we would also compete just in the way, like one of my most famous games, my most loved games is Streets of Rage that me and my brother used to play together all the time. So gaming was also very co-op as well at the same time. So yeah, I think though, for a lot of people who make games now, a lot of people think they have to follow a trend. And I don't think you have to follow a trend. And if anything, if you take anything away from this talk, is that you don't have to follow a trend. Nintendo have never once in their life followed a trend, and they are the world's biggest video game company. That's not to say, you know, you have to do what Nintendo does. Exactly the opposite. That's my point. You can make so many different experiences. I mean, who knew that a game like Ace Attorney, a story-based game about a lawyer arguing cases, would become so popular around the world? And that's because they decided to do Capcom and the team decided to do something different. And it's eluded me why I can't think of his name, because he's one of my favorite game creators. But the point is, sometimes if you go after something different to the market, you can create something amazing. Shu Takumi, that's who created Ace Attorney. Yeah. But also I see it with a lot of the indie developers. I always say, like, those people who go after niche markets are actually poised to be a lot more successful, because gaming has always been social and still is social. And so if you pick a market with a really, really dedicated fan base, such as visual novel, you'll actually be able to attract this audience that is super engaged in your game, who will want to talk about it, will want to buy it, want to market it, want to promote it, want to do all these things for you. And you can be just as successful. I mean, aim to be successful, don't aim to be Fortnite. That's what I would say.
Yeah, true. That's a good, that segues really well with my second question, which was, you mentioned in the end that how games are connected, and how games are connected with music, with films, with everything. Like a lot of these platforms are successful because they had like all this overlap of different media. It wasn't, people think like, no, you had a Nintendo. No, Nintendo was the full entertainment system. That's why it was called NES. It was the whole thing. Why do you think, like, I would put, what are the characteristics that you think a game should have in order to connect with it? This is I know
it's a tough question, but I think, I mean, you could do a whole talk on this, but if it's just a simple answer, the thing that a game should focus to have is to be, I mean, it sounds stupid, but the things that a game needs, in my opinion, is to have something that connects it to the audience. So something that's, and that can be loads of different things, but ultimately something that makes it enjoyable and fun and speaks to the player, whether that's a cool character, whether that's a unique gameplay mechanic. Maybe in some cases, if you've created a rhythm game, it's great music or a different way of playing. It's something unique that helps a game stand out in the market, that is fun and enjoyable. And ultimately, gaming should be accessible. Like, it should be accessible to all, if possible. Some games aren't always accessible to all, but I think we're moving more and more as an industry to a point where there is greater accessibility. I didn't mention it in my talk, but Microsoft have created accessible controllers, and they're brilliant. And I know that more and more game creators are creating accessible actions. So yeah, if you're making a game, I would say, if your game uses characters, have great characterization, someone who the audience can look up to, or not necessarily look up to, but relate to, fun, unique and interesting gameplay. And if you can, make it as accessible as possible. Like I say, I could do a whole talk on that one. Maybe I will next time.
That's a complicated one. But then one more. When you're talking about the 80s and when ET
Yes.
pretty much brought the market down, one misconception that a lot of people have is that people thought the video games were dead. And the whole point is that no, the video game market was dead in United States, maybe in the Western market. Like in South America, it hasn't even started yet. By the time people thought it was dying, it was actually waking up in South America.
Yeah.
In Japan, they never even saw any of these clashes. Like
So yeah, you're right. This is very much the crash of the North American market. So America, Canada, and we can't be deluded in the fact that it did affect Europe in a lot of ways as well, because it was part of Nintendo, and to a greater extent, when we talk about Europe exclusively, Sega's efforts that revived Europe's industry. But I mean, Europe had different problems. It was mainly a home computer market, which made it very expensive and made it very prohibitive in those ways. In terms of what Atari did, which Atari was still massive in Europe as well. But if we say the Europe and North American markets, it wasn't, first of all, you're totally right. This was a problem exclusive to certain regions of the world, albeit two of the three biggest regions for gaming in the world, the other being Japan, that didn't experience this same decline. And in fact, never has when it comes to the arcades. They're still popular there. But also, a common misconception is because the games were bad. No, some games were bad. A lot of games were phenomenal at the time. The problem is the consumers couldn't quite work out which games were good and which games were bad. The curation level on Atari was awful, and we didn't have the internet era for people to share their experiences. Ultimately, the way you shared your experience back in those days was either reading a review in a magazine or by saying on the school playing field, that game's rubbish, don't buy it. That game's good, do buy it.
Which comes to the point of the question that I wanted to make, which is, we are seeing the same thing in mobile games now, which you have a market where you have 100,000 games going in the market every day, copies of copies. Like you have a good game and then you have 10 of their games that are simply a direct copy of that game in the market. Do you think we're going to the same direction? Not I mean on the crash of the mobile games, because that will not happen, but on the sense of a apocalyptical action that is going to turn the thing around and make the market change itself.
Yeah, so interestingly, when I used to work at Chilingo, when it was part of EA, back in the day, I was always a believer that whilst the iOS market was slightly different, because much like Nintendo, there's a level of curation and rules, I was always of the belief that the Google App Store would see a crash on the level of Atari. And I also was under the belief that if it wasn't careful, Steam might also see a crash on the level of Atari's market. Those two were the two I was always worried about. Like I say, iOS slightly less. Actually, what I think we've seen is the market adapt to that. Now, the market, so first of all, when it comes to Steam, obviously Steam have stopped the green light process, though you can still publish a lot of rubbish. And in actual fact, we've seen a lot of terrible games get released on PlayStation. I'm thinking Life of Black Tiger, I'm thinking, what's that guy who releases his bad game every year, but the point is,
there are so many.
Yeah, we have seen some bad games, and I don't mean bad as in because people just didn't like them. I mean like broken games effectively, and obviously we see that on Google, but actually I think the way the market is slightly shifted is through the, and this isn't a self-plug, but is through indie publishers. So people like Chorus and Another Indie and all these different indie publishers that are available for indies to work with, Plugin Digital, I mean, in the mobile space, Quali, all these people. I think this is actually where we've seen a turn in the market, because people like us at Chorus and people like them are effectively doing the work that the store isn't doing. It's doing the quality check. Now, of course, on platforms like Microsoft, PlayStation, and Nintendo, there is still quality checks. And you have to trust me, even working for a publisher, there's a lot of quality checks. But when it comes to things like Steam and the Google App Store, I think what we're seeing is if you have a name attached to your game, it's giving you a little bit of extra credit. So I think there definitely needs to be more curation on markets like Steam, because it's very easy for games to get lost among everything. In fact, the Nintendo Switch store has a little bit of a curation problem, in my opinion. And but I think that the indie publishers and also the market itself, like Twitter, Reddit, social media, and knowing the games is helping to mitigate part of that, because you can just quickly go on the internet and explore how good or not good a game is. It's a lot easier to be found out if you're just trying to release something terrible. Like, yeah, so I think there will be changes that will need to be made on the likes of Steam and Google Play, but we might not hit the same apocalyptic levels because the market is adapting to try and stop that in many ways.
And then last one, so we can close up, is like, what do you think it's for the indie developers that want to start now? Like here in the region, there are a lot of people that either are starting their company or they are striving to grow their company. And there are a lot of students, like these students from NTI, that are probably going to be the next talents in game development. What would you say to them? What should they keep in mind being the next game developers?
I think there's a few things you should keep in mind. Is one, this is such an amazingly creative industry. So be creative. Don't think that there's silly ideas. Create new things, have a new go, join things like game jams, or if you've got something that's a more solid production, then come along to things like the Big Indie Pitch that I run, or other competitions like the Nordic Game Show, or, you know, like the Indie Prize or anything like that. Or, you know, I'm sure you'll be running stuff as well. There's loads of competitions, because it's not just that the competition is there to like tell you whether you've got a good or a bad idea, but you'll meet so many people that will help you spark ideas and flow things. So I think the gaming industry is an industry where you should never stop learning. If even just one of the games that you saw in my talk has piqued your interest that you maybe haven't played, go play it. It might just be the slightest thing, like how the menus works, that inspires you to change something in your game. So it's an industry where you should never stop learning. And so play lots of games, make lots of creations. Maybe some of them will work, maybe some of them won't. It's a bit like being a writer, I suppose. You might start 5 stories and only finish 1, but keep the other 4, because you might come back to them in a little bit of time. You know, there's never a bad idea in many respects, as long as it's got your heart and passion into it. So yeah, I would say play games, keep learning, keep doing your research, but at the same time, be social about it. Talk to your colleagues, you know, your fellow students, be a part of game jams, you know, never be afraid to ask things and try things out, you know, and you know, as you grow in the industry, you know, be a part of it, talk to people, share ideas where you can, where you want to. Don't share your, you know, everything, but you know what I mean. And I think that will ultimately help you as well. And also keep an eye on the, you know, what markets are new and growing, and which ones are most indie friendly as well, such as like Itch is a great platform for indie developers that has a hell of a lot of support at the moment.
Wonderful. Thank you.
No worries.
Thank you very much for the talk.
No, thank
Sophie.
you.
And thank you guys for hanging on here. And
thank you.
Greg. Thank you. The talks are being recorded and they're gonna be shared afterwards. So the people that couldn't be here, don't worry, we're gonna share, and you are gonna be my guide. Like every time people want to know something about games, I'm gonna tell them, go watch this.
Oh, well,
first,
actually, yes.
Come and ask me questions.
I should say, just before we switch off, I'm gonna pop my email address in here. There you go. And if anyone just has any questions, because obviously this was more of a whistle stop tour. If anyone has any specific questions that they want to ask me, hit me up on email or on Twitter. I know it's on the Game On website. Just let me know that you were watching the talk, and then I'll know where you got my contact from. Yeah, and if someone afterwards loses that or can let me know, send me a message, I can share. Happy to introduce. Yeah, definitely. Thank you. And guys, have a nice evening. So have a nice evening. Too. We talk soon. Yeah. Bye. See you before I go, see you tomorrow with Craig Chappell talking about mobile games and how the market has been in the last year, especially with the pandemic. Craig is also an old friend of ours. He's brilliant. Like an encyclopedia of data. You guys are gonna love it. So see you all tomorrow in the same time. Thank you. Bye. Bye.